Too many guitarists get confused by this. And it's one of the most powerful ways to improve your playing because inside of here is a universe of new sounds. In this video, I'm going to show you how to clear the confusion, and at the end, we're going to look at how not just to understand it, but how to get the most out of it. So I was fortunate that when I started playing bass as a teenager, I spent years studying with a great teacher who was a Berkeley professor, but also just happened to teach at the local music store down the street. And one of the classes he taught was theory, so he would get pretty deep into it. And that was great and all, but the problem was he always assumed I knew what he was talking about, and I was too shy at the time to speak up when things didn't make sense, which was pretty often. And now I think of scales like this, because there's always more contained within each one, and every one has a different sound or color. And sometimes it's simply just what note you're focusing on the most that determines what mode of a major scale you're hearing. So when you play a C major scale against a C note, it sounds like a C major scale. That C is the most restful spot, but if we change it to a D, kind of like a D in the bass, hear that tension now? Because it wants to go to the D note, right? And that's what we call a D Dorian mode. So it's built on the second scale degree. Now, if we do another common one, G, it wants to go to, of course, the G note. That's called G Mixolydian. And if we do another common one, A, that's built upon the sixth scale degree, and that's the A minor scale, also known as Aeolian. It's what they call the relative minor of C major. That's why in a key signature they have the same thing. They share the same exact notes. So there's always scales kind of within those scales depending on what note or what kind of chord you're focused on, A minor versus C and stuff. And don't let the names intimidate you because they literally are Greek, but the names aren't all that important. It's best to just focus on how they sound, to your ears. And you can hear how each of those have a distinct sound despite being the same exact notes. So therefore, there's 7 different modes because there's 7 notes in a major scale, with the major scale itself being considered one, again, Ionian. But in popular music, there's really only 4 that you hear a lot, so we're going to focus on those mostly. Now, a lot of people try to translate what mode they're playing from the major scale it's derived from, but I find out it's a lot easier to compare it to the major scale in a different way. So for instance, if we compare Mixolydian to the major scale, the only difference between the two is a flat 7. So you just flat that 7 right there. Let's hear what that sounds like over a beat with just a C note played in the bass, and then we'll go to Dorian, which is just changing one note from Mixolydian by having a flat 3rd, and then lastly the minor scale, which has just one more note change from Dorian with a flat 6. And really pay attention to how each one has its own color and mood. Songs that revolve around the major scale, aka Ionian, we've got Don't Let Me Down by the Beatles, Gravity, John Mayer, Melissa by the Allman Brothers. For the Mixolydian mode, we've got tunes like Can't You See by the Marshall Tucker Band, Your Time Is Gonna Come by Led Zeppelin, and Jessica by the Allman Brothers. For the Dorian mode, we've got Evil Ways by Santana, Come Together by the Beatles, Whipping Post by the Allman Brothers. Minor scale, aka Aeolian, we've got Watchtower by Bob Dylan, Layla by Eric Clapton, and Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin. Now here's what it sounds like if I just play the minor pentatonic, right? Now what if I add in a couple notes from the minor scale? So it isn't better or worse, it just simply adds a little more color to it. So while using modes are not necessary, they do add more options than relying mostly on the pentatonic scale. The first thing you can do to get the most out of using modes is to see it in relation to the pentatonic. So just focus on the 2 extra notes that are added to those 5 from the pentatonic, and in particularly the most unique one, like the flat 7 versus the major 7 for Mixolydian versus the major scale. And the second thing you can do is to know when to use these, and it can be a pretty deep topic to get into, but I find that the best thing to do is to use your ears and not get too bogged down in all the theory and thinking like a mathematician, you know? So just like you want to get familiar with how each mode has a unique sound, listen to something that you want to play a solo over, whether it's a chord progression or just jamming over one chord, and then notice how that sounds to see what mode matches up best. And you know, modes are great and everything, but there's actually one more thing that if you don't focus on, it's gonna hold you back just as much as not understanding modes. That's why you should watch this video here next, because I'm gonna walk you through an approach that's improved my playing far more than understanding modes and being able to play them well, because modes by themselves mean nothing unless you do this with them.